Could you tell me about the rebellion?
Oh, the rebellion. We just took back what was stolen from us.
That's...
It's a place where we, the Ashina people, lived, where the waters flowed straight from the source. We were a people who loved our country dearly, and we made good sake to boot.
But then the world fell into chaos.
Yes, now it's a place of death. It's a bitter thing indeed.
Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, From Software's 2019 Game of the Year, turns 5 years old this month. I can't believe it. I'm still used to thinking of Sekiro as From's newest, latest project. Maybe that's because it's so timeless, so unlike any video game I've ever played, even unlike any other game Hidetaka Miyazaki has ever made. So given the occasion, I wanted to revisit and celebrate Sekiro, but I wanted to do so in a different kind of way. When we think of Sekiro, most of us naturally gravitate toward its one-of-a-kind combat system, the true clashing of swords it's so well known for, and for good reason. But because so much has already been said about its combat, I feel inspired to dissect another aspect of the game, one that complements the combat system and helps it reach its full potential, and that's world design. From big picture concepts to historical influence to nitty-gritty level design, I want to slow down and dive deep into the beautiful yet horrifying world of Ashina. And to do that, I recruited Katiecakes, a friend from the community, someone who spent years studying this game forward and backward, completing daunting challenge runs and compiling highly detailed gameplay guides, the best of their kind on YouTube in my opinion. You can find a link to Katie's channel along with links to my Discord and Patreon pages down in the description. But let's get started. So while all the modern From Software games certainly have their illusions and influences, Sekiro's world differs pretty significantly from the other Soulsborne games in that it is to a degree rooted in real history. It's set during the Sengoku era of Japan, which was basically this unending period of civil war in the 15th and 16th centuries, a time when Japan was definitely not unified or resembling the Japan we know today. Sekiro is set in an unspecified location called Ashina because it's ruled by a fictionalized version of the Ashina clan, which did exist in Japan during this era. Mount Kongo is also a named location in the game, and there is a real Mount Kongo in the south central, southwestern part of the country, the Kansai region, which is also where Japan's oldest castle is located, Himeji Castle, which has a striking resemblance to Ashina Castle in the game. So I'm guessing for the development team, this region largely inspired the game's setting.
Yes.
There's lots of little details that make this world feel really believable and lived in too. It's certainly tempting to just blaze through the game, to sprint through levels and miss stuff like this. But if you slow down during a playthrough, you'll notice things like reservoirs for collecting water, stables for livestock, lived-in houses, gardens and little crop fields. The locations in the game, to me, don't just feel like they were designed to be video game levels alone. They feel like grounded places where people actually lived. But despite some of this realness, some light supernatural and fantasy elements are present in the game world too. Like we encounter a demon and a giant serpent and tons of anthropomorphic animals, almost like aspects of myth and folklore have come to life. What do you make of this setting, Katie? And what are some of your thoughts about From Software's spin on this time and place?
From what I remember is that thought process behind creating Sekiro is for a Japanese audience. Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, and Bloodborne, the way they are received by the Japanese people, they were very popular. It's kind of how the Western audience received Sekiro, in that there's a lot of mystery and a little bit of, confusion, but there's definitely a cultural barrier and a language barrier. That's a big one. So in terms of, yes, I do think it was a passion project in that like they wanted to give something to the Japanese audience, something that they can really relate to, because, you know, this is so deeply rooted in real history and well-known folklore and legends and so on and so forth. You can definitely tell like someone really loved what they were doing when they made this thing. There's so much love and real attention poured into it. And like you were saying earlier about, you know, if you slow down and you're not blazing through and you really look, you can notice a lot of things. I really recommend like anyone who enjoys this game, it's such a pleasure to just kill through an area, just empty out an area and just walk and turn up the sound effects, turn down the music, and you can really see and hear a lot of little things just injected throughout the world. It's quite amazing, especially in texts. You see a lot of that in Mibu and the Fountainhead especially. You see a lot of writing. Those give a lot of indication as well when they're legible, when you can actually read what they're saying. In terms of comparing with the previous FromSoft titles, the ones preceding Sekiro anyway, there is something kind of, how should I put it, like it's more relatable. Like you can really put yourself in that world because it is, you know, based off of the real world. It's not, you know, this fantasy land, or some people may not feel that the connection to this real world, this real Japanese world, but I do.
You know, I remember really resonating with Demon Souls in the sense that in Boletaria, there's mess halls where the troops would eat, and instead of random elevators and gates, the shortcuts feel very real and believable and grounded, like water wheels or something.
Yeah, absolutely. They do the same with all of their games to a degree. That's why they're so enjoyable. There's always something to pick up on and to notice. But I do feel it's part of the level design as well, right? Which they're excellent at, but they've always been so attentive to detail. It's just that with Sekiro, there's just something it just differs a bit from the other ones, just simply because it's based off of a real location, a real time in history.
I know a lot of people in the FromSoft community have been pretty obsessed with the idea of interconnected level design since Dark Souls 1, and in a lot of ways, Ashina kind of feels like Miyazaki's most blatant attempt to recapture that somewhat seamless vibe of Lordran to me, to the point where from the beginning, you just have access to a really beautiful in-game map of the world, which clearly features this center-out design with Ashina outskirts and the castle being at the center, and then sort of surrounded in all directions by the other locations you'll visit, like Fountainhead Palace high into the north, the Sunken Valley and Mibu Village far below into the east, Senpou Temple again up high into the west, and then Hirata Estate much lower along a river sort of to the southwest. I know during a recent playthrough, I think beyond boss battles, beyond anything else really, I just enjoyed the climb up to Senpou Temple and the crazy descent down into the Sunken Valley and contending with the gun fort. Those are my favorite parts of the playthrough. Any thoughts on this world layout?
I think you sense that. I think the only other game, like you mentioned, where you can really get that sense of verticality is Dark Souls 1. I mean, you can see from the map very clearly that, you know, it goes from a very, very low down place in lava all the way, well, actually even below the lava if you do the DLC bit, right? Going from where Manus is all the way down there. Maybe is that lower than, you know what, I actually don't know. Is that part, vertically speaking, is it lower than
Yeah, I know what you mean, because the Abyss is such a strange concept. I suppose it's hard to say if in terms of physical space it should be thought of as existing below Izalith, but either way, DS1 definitely gives you that sense of going back and forth between hell and heaven.
Or the illusion of hell.
Yeah, exactly. The whole thing might be hell, actually.
Well, just like the fountainhead, also, like, if we're gonna talk about that, well, you have your wonderful experience of descending down to the gun fort, which is awesome, by the way. I mean, but once you know that you just gotta grapple through and get by them and then backtrack to get them, to get out all those bitches shooting at you. I do want to say that I loved that bit of coming up from the dungeons to the Senpou area. It was quite magical because, well, I was lost in the dungeon horribly, and even though it's such a small area, but it can get really confusing in all those tunnels on your first playthrough. It's terrifying and very disturbing, all those noises and people being tortured and whatnot. It's a very claustrophobic environment, and then up, you take that lift and all of a sudden it's beautiful that you can breathe again. Like, you can literally... Like, that's the things that's so special about Sekiro that I don't really sense anywhere other than maybe Bloodborne, is I can smell the environment. Like, you can smell the wetness of the stone and the snow and the leaves and the trees and all that. But that experience of going from the dungeons to all of a sudden, you know, we can breathe again, and I'll never forget that feeling. Just like going to the fountainhead. You gotta beat the monk first to be able to enjoy this vista. And it's beautiful, but once you go in there, there is something really, really wrong with this place. Like, you can, like, just, you know, when you see the people and like how deformed they are, there's a sickness in that place that I felt immediately the first time I went there. And it does, in a way, it reminded me a little bit of Anor Londo to a degree, because Anor Londo is also an illusion, the way we first see it, the very, very first time, this beautiful sunlit place, but it's actually not like that at all. So yeah, it's interesting that they bring this little bit of similarity across their games. I share your love of that very first time experience that you'll never forget. And every time you go back, you're reminded of that feeling as well, of, you know, of seeing these places for the first time.
You got me thinking, Katie, of when you come out of the dank, claustrophobic dungeon into what feels like a beautiful breath of fresh air with Senpou. And in that sense, it does remind you of Anor Londo because it seems so heavenly. But of course, in these games, things are so rarely what they appear to be on the surface, because the monks at Senpou are in fact not kind and pious like you might think they should be.
No.
You know, doing these terrible experiments on children. It's awful. It's very Healing Church. It's very Miyazaki. A couple things FromSoft manages to do so well in their games is one, subvert your expectations, but also constantly entice you with what comes next. Because when you initially get up to the Senpou area, the first thing that catches your eye is the big bridge above. And it seems so far away at the time, but before you know it, you're up there having a mini boss battle on that very bridge. And then once you get across the bridge, then you see the pagoda-like structure even higher above, and you think, man, that seems so far off. But again, before you know it, you're up there inside collecting its treasure. I think whereas games like Dark Souls 2 and Elden Ring feel so grandiose and like overwhelmingly enormous, and that's fun to engage with in its own way. But Sekiro really shines, in my opinion, because it does feel so tight and self-contained. There's really no fat on the bones. I mean, Senpou in general, when you're first traversing Ashina outskirts, basically the first proper level in the game, you keep spotting this mountain in the distance covered in red leaves, and before you know it, you're there. Yeah, you have high visibility to distant locations, places you're going to travel to later or places you've already been. It feels like a very self-contained world. But I think in terms of exploration, that's pretty satisfying. Again, that's kind of a FromSoft trope, like walking out of Vort's boss arena in Dark Souls 3 and seeing much of the game world sprawling in front of you. But that feels really well executed here in Sekiro.
And it's really cool that in Sekiro, most of everything you see you can get there. And that is something that I personally almost insist on. And I thought that they did it very well in Elden Ring, and very well in Sekiro, is that if you can see a place, you should be able to get there. I wanted to go back to what you were saying about the design of Senpou. There's just so much in this area. Not saying that the others aren't, but so much of the story is kind of central to Senpou. A lot of stuff cannot happen without this area. I mean, you wouldn't even be able to get the Mortal Blade if you don't come here. I really connected with what you were saying about the monks because, like, you know, just the experience of, okay, you're coming out of the dungeons and now you can breathe, but then, you know, you see, at least it was for me, when I saw that monk standing off at that broken bridge, the very first monk you see, my first thought was, oh, a monk, good, friend, I'm gonna go. But then it was just total FromSoft reflex. I just hit the lock-on button. It was just so natural for me to do it. And as I was able to lock onto him, I was like, no, what's this? And, you know, and then you go up to him and I just stack babbed him. And I saw that, you know, when you do that animation, you see their face up close. It's all rotten. I knew that something was wrong with this place. And then as you progress, like you were saying, with those horrible experiments that they were doing with children, you see those dead bodies lying around. That's one thing. But what really concerned me was there were these two children. I believe they're off to the left side if you're facing the stairs up. There's these two children and there's pacifying agent next to them. I was so not cool with that when I picked that up. I was like, you were giving this drug to the children so that they wouldn't scream when you're doing horrible things to them.
Yeah, like you said, so much environmental storytelling, from the enemy designs to the corpses strewn about, and then you have these little pinwheels and statues all over the mountain, almost watching you as you go about the level. And then you encounter the armored warrior, aka Robert's dad, and he's going on about his son, who he brought to this place because he heard they were capable of healing children here, the monks. And also while on the mountain, we hear the voice of a girl speaking to us through a Buddhist scroll, telling us the monks have been seduced by their pursuit of immortality. And of course, there's a memorial mob merchant here, and they're basically grave diggers. That's how they got everything they're selling. So without ever coming right out and saying it, I guess, the devs are telling a story in this place of how a group of monks lost their way and began trying to create basically another Kuro, a false dragon's heritage. And if you have your eyes and ears open, you can draw this conclusion long before you meet the divine child of rejuvenation. And I strongly believe that attempting to wrap your head around the story of Senpou, it makes the gameplay experience of climbing this mountain and fighting all these monks that much more enjoyable. That's probably why we both keep circling back to Senpou as we're talking about the world of this game. And the folding screen monkeys. You know, as time has gone on, I've become so much more appreciative of non-traditional or puzzle or gimmick bosses, whatever you want to call them. But I remember the first time I played this game and got to this boss, I was confused. Why is there not a Genichiro style badass at the top of this mountain? That's the question I was asking myself. And this is a very polarizing boss in the game. A lot of people don't like this boss, they don't get it. But I remember later reading about this Japanese maxim of the three wise monkeys. One covers its eyes, see no evil. One covers its ears, hear no evil. One covers its mouth, speak no evil. So yeah, I think there's just so much thoughtfulness in this entire game, but this level specifically, Senpou, and some of it really goes over people's heads. Some of this stuff went over my head the first time I played through the game.
Unless someone looked it up, there's no way they were able to do it quickly. It was very confusing at first, and it's meant to be a labyrinth to kind of trap you and keep you in this illusion. But there's a purpose for everything in these games. And like you said, with gimmick or quote unquote gimmick bosses, there is definitely something to appreciate there, because there's a purpose to their existence, and with the monkeys they lend so much to the story. It definitely possesses the most disturbing enemies in the game, I would say. For example, the helicopter ninjas. They're pretty terrifying for a first timer to come across. They're very difficult to contend with, even for experienced players, because they're very hard to fight deflecting wise. But when you really look at them, I don't know if you noticed, but they have a big hole on the side of their cheek. And I listened to the noises that they make when they're fighting, and it's very disturbing, but it sounds like they are mute. It sounds like they had their tongues ripped out, and it makes sense because they are, sort of gatekeepers or secret keepers. They can see all the stuff going around in this place. That's one, disturbing thing. And then there's those crawling centipede guys, those Wolverine guys. There's that too. I would say probably Senpou is so intriguing also because it's the largest area, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of not just the verticality of it, but also all these little hidden pockets. That's the thing, like you were saying, is if you really look, there's a lot to explore, and that's just good game design.
Maybe one last note overall on this world is that, well, it does feel like you're on a grand adventure across this land of Ashina with lots of biome diversity. I think because of who you are, this character Wolf, and the fact that there's no conventional online multiplayer in the game, traversing this world feels like an especially solitary and kind of lonely undertaking. Do you feel the same, Katie?
Absolutely. It works for the story, and they made such a good call with giving us our very first fixed protagonist. It should have been that way with Dark Souls 2. It would have been great to go around as a Faram Knight, that was the original idea anyway. But with Sekiro, the way it ties into the combat as well, right? There's a reason why it works the way it works, because when you have more than one person facing off your combatants, the combat just won't flow the way it does with its musicality and the sense of rhythm and all that. That's what makes the combat what it is the rhythm. Aside from that, back to the solitary journey, yes, it feels that way because of what the story is about. And I think it might be something that takes a little bit for a first time, a person's first time playing through the game to really get that notion. And it's confusing too. The story is a bit cryptic, but you start out the journey for real, you're essentially an empty vessel, or rather you're a vessel of regret. And you have to go through this journey of trials and suffering and the journey of remembering who you are. It's these experiences along this journey, what Wolf sees and how he takes it all in, that feeds into the pivotal decision that he gets when he comes up to his dad, the roof. That's what some people say, that it doesn't make sense. He's been murdering people this whole time. Of course, he would easily turn to the dark side, but that's really not the case, because it just, how should I put it? I think that's where a little bit of that fourth wall is broken. It depends on how the player perceives the information that they are being shown. Another thing with the fourth wall is the whole memory loss thing. It's kind of cool, isn't it? Like, you start out as this ninja who forgot everything, and that's why you're a wet noodle who doesn't know how to play the game.
Yeah, you've been in this well for who knows how long, malnourished, depressed, basically amnesiac, which is another FromSoft trope. And even then, you're like 10 minutes away from getting one of your arms sliced off. You think your dad is dead, your master has been kidnapped again. It's a beautiful setup when you think about it for a new player.
Yes, they didn't like. Sure, they do kind of imply that a bit, but a bit shoddily in comparison with the other games. They do that as well. You know, you're another wet noodle who wakes up in a prison, whatever, right? And you gotta go to the level up lady and kill things to level up and so on and so forth. But it's not really like that in Sekiro. They did it quite differently. If you were to have a friend with you I love co-oping. It would be fun, but it would defeat the purpose of the story.
I feel like the game world almost makes you, as Wolf, skeptical or paranoid of everyone and everything. Even Emma and the Sculptor, seemingly your only two friends at the Dilapidated Temple, but depending on your decisions in the game, they become enemies, bosses you fight. So because FromSoft has conditioned us to expect a friendly hub full of people you can summon and merchants, and you'll spot the occasional phantom, another player in their world just passing you by. Sekiro is a real surprise when you first play it. At least I felt that way. I felt so alone. I felt so isolated. It never felt like someone or something was coming to help me.
For sure. We do have one friend. We have our buddy Hanbei.
Yes, we do.
But yes, speaking of what you were saying about Emma and the Sculptor, I feel he and Wolf from the very get-go, they share a little bit of a kinship, but Wolf doesn't know why. He doesn't remember. It's kind of funny though, when he first wakes up, do you notice when he looks at his arm, he's not shocked or horrified or anything. It's like he's remembering something that he had lost, and he's seeing it again after a very long time. It's not the kind of reaction you would expect from someone who lost their arm and sees. It's kind of terrifying looking when you really look at that arm. Mm-hmm. It looks dangerous, and it's used, and when you look at the description, it's covered in blood, so
yeah.
But and about the friendly hub thing with Emma, I have so much to say about her. What you were saying about, again, the solitary journey and Wolf being so skeptical, I felt that it helps that I do understand the language to a degree, because I'm half Japanese and I can read the subtitles for the most part when they're in Japanese. When he speaks to Emma, from the very beginning, there is a level of distrust there, and I connected with Wolf from the beginning. He's just such a well-designed character that he's unoffensive. Like he's easy to like. My first thought was probably what he was thinking, the way he was talking to her too, is who are you? Like, where did you come from and what do you want?
I mean, isn't there a moment, Katie, later in the game in Kuro's chamber when you go to talk to Emma, and my read of it was that Wolf, being this smart, observant master shinobi, that he's able at a glance to size her up and conclude she knows how to use a blade, right? Because there's some dialogue where Wolf straight up asks her, who trained you to fight with a blade? And she's very dismissive and innocent about it. Like, oh, I'm just a doctor. And Wolf's like, you're trained with a blade. What's the story?
Yes, there's a lot in the undertone that they're polite and congenial with one another on the surface, but there is definitely a level of distrust, and eventually it turns into animosity when you go through the storyline of getting the second Hirata memory, him questioning her about what he had overheard at the Dilapidated Temple. He is so impatient with her. Like, he is literally telling her, I am sick and tired of your bullshit. I heard what you said. I think right from the get-go, they established this notion, I suppose, that she's not to be trusted. Don't take everything she says Seriously, because when you read the item descriptions too, they don't really match up to what she's saying.
Right.
She's just one person. It's part of the very long journey out of many people that you meet. It's cool. You can see Wolf's behavior changing with each person. Like the way he talks to the divine child of rejuvenation. I just call her Debbie. It's way too long of a name. When he talks to Debbie, I mean, he doesn't know her, right? But the way he talks to her is so different from when he talks to Emma, or indeed anyone else.
He has a real reverence and a real respect when he speaks to Kuro that he doesn't really, he doesn't quite have that tone with anyone else in the game.
Isshin, he does.
Oh, true. That's a good call.
He's the only other person than Kuro that he kneels to.
I love Isshin. A side note, too, for anyone who hasn't done it, you have to go give Isshin in his quarters at Ashina Castle all the different types of sake. Mm-hmm. He has so much to say when you do it, and that dialogue adds so much flavor to the game, yet it could be very easily missed. One last note before we move on, Katie, on the Sculptor and that sense of paranoia or distrust that's so ubiquitous in the game world, like we were talking about. Having already played Bloodborne, when I experienced Sekiro for the first time and woke up in the dilapidated temple as Wolf and saw this guy across the room missing a limb, he almost appeared to be stuck there or had no will to leave, and he was sculpting these angry Buddha statues that he tells you are byproducts of his spite. Instantly I was like, oh my god, he's the Garamond of this game world. Clearly it must be, right? And even though he and Garamond are very different characters, there are some parallels there, and you can fight him as a boss later in the game as the Demon of Hatred. I just feel like the game really primes you to be suspicious as you move through the world. I mean, you're literally on guard during your whole playthrough, your sword raised, ready to deflect anything and everything.
You know, that's a really good observation. I never thought of that waking up in the dilapidated temple is similar to waking up from the blood transfusion, or rather the passing out from it.
So as we get into the game's micro design, I think it's worth shouting out Masaru Yamamura, who was a designer on Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, and then became the lead gameplay designer on Sekiro, and then the full director of Armored Core 6. So it feels like he's really a rising star at the company, maybe reaching that Yui Tanimura level now in terms of being one of Miyazaki's most trusted collaborators. But he's certainly got to be one of those people who's largely responsible for the way Sekiro feels to play minute to minute, why the game feels so good and fun and fluid.
There is a similarity to Sekiro Armored Core in terms of, like you said, the feel. It's the momentum. It's the rhythm and the momentum of the game. It's electrifying, and it's more fast-paced. It's more adrenaline-driven, both Sekiro and Armored Core, compared to the other ones, which are more slower-paced, I think. I think it has to do with the fact that you don't have any stamina in Sekiro.
Yeah, because of the new unlimited speed you have in this game. There's no stamina. There's no waiting on a meter to refill. You can just sprint and jump and grapple all you want all over the place. And these new abilities the player has access to in Sekiro, they probably wouldn't be fully realized if the level design itself wasn't accommodating and complementary of those abilities, right? And it very much is, in the sense that when it comes to the actual pathways you traverse, they're much wider and taller than before. The ceilings are much higher too, if they exist at all, because much of Sekiro does take place outside, which again is very fitting for the combat system. There's a huge focus on verticality and platforming, which not only plays into combat with aerial attacks and stealth kills, but exploration too. It's always worth peering over a cliffside to see if there's a system of branches or a little pathway you can shimmy through to find items or secrets. And I think what I really appreciate about the level design overall is how many options you have as the player when it comes to approaching and solving combat puzzles. Often in the Soulsborne games, there's only one way into a room or area and only one way out. And of course, the enemy placement is relative to those entrances and exits. Whereas Sekiro has these much larger, wider combat arenas where how you enter, how you exit, what strategy you take is very much up to you with really no right or wrong answer. Like right now, Katie, I'm sure you and I could play through Ashina Outskirts, just the Ashina Outskirts level right now, side by side. And even though we would ultimately end up at the same place, exactly how we got there and how we engaged with enemies and the level geometry itself would probably be pretty different, I'm guessing. Any thoughts yourself here?
I think it's ingenious because of the ease of traversal. You are encouraged to be creative with how you approach a fight, especially the ones with, you know, a whole entourage, right? Like the samurai guys, they always have a gang around them, or the drunkards. It is cool. Like you can take them head on, or you can pick them off one by one on the, you know, or you can go around the back and with a backtracking method, or you can be an absolute boss and just take them all on at once. I've seen a number of very impressive displays of doing that with very ingenious use of prosthetics, you know, just to be able to crowd control. That is the beauty of it, is that even with traversal, it lends to the amount of creativity that the players can delve into. Like they go side by side, the traversal and the combat, just like the story and the combat. It all it's a very tightly and intricately woven web.
Yeah, and like dungeon crawling has always been a tentpole of the Miyazaki from software games, going all the way back to Boletarian Palace or Sen's Fortress. But in Sekiro, levels like Hirata Estate and Ashina Castle really feel like precursors to Elden Ring's legacy dungeons to me. They're just so vast. There's so much up and down, so many nooks and crannies. There's secrets to hunt for, NPCs to talk to. There's mini bosses, there's main bosses. I don't think we see the big complex dungeons of Elden Ring like Stormveil Castle without those that came before in Sekiro. Do you agree with that?
I definitely can feel that. Like, I mean, for once in Sekiro, we can actually get to rooftops, right? And it's nice that I really am all about internal spaces as well. I've always hated that in FromSoft games, these amazing locations, and yet there's a whole lot that you don't get to see. Like Canehurst can be so much more. It can be there's so many. Oh, castle is massive. It's got so many rooms, so many levels to it, and instead, you know, if you know where you're going, you can just blaze right through it. It's not that there's not much to see at Canehurst. Ultimately, the best part of Elden Ring is exploring. Personally, that's my take on it.
Yeah, it's basically a 3D platformer, Elden Ring.
It is so good. They really took from Sekiro and made it and just expanded it more. And you have so much internal and external places that you can get to, you can climb to, and so on. But interesting to note that a lot of people don't know, and I find that it makes perfect sense when I did know, is that Elden Ring and Sekiro were made at the same time. For once, we do get to jump right in a Souls-like game. My God.
Yeah, well, and it's funny because for years it felt like Miyazaki was really funneling us onto rooftops. Like you mentioned, Canehurst, we get out on the rooftops there. There's a lot of rooftops in DS3. I mean, one of the most memorable parts of DS1 is basically climbing up the side of the cathedral in Anor Londo. But you're never fully unleashed in those moments because the game mechanics can't support it. Whereas to this day, one of my favorite parts of Sekiro is still just hopping and grappling around the rooftops of Ashina Castle, and it feels like that takes us directly into Elden Ring, that amazing optional stretch of Raya Lucaria where you're just platforming across all the rooftops, or gosh, Leyndell. Leyndell is probably my favorite area in the entire game. You could almost imagine it as a Sekiro level with Wolf grappling between the rooftops and stealth killing enemies from above. So because of the abilities Wolf has, because of this very wide and freeing level design that to an extent did carry over into Elden Ring, I think Sekiro will probably remain a pretty timeless game. Like, I can't imagine even 10, 20 years from now, anything about it feeling dated.
I was wondering what you thought of the Metroidvanian aspect of Sekiro, if there really is any, to be honest, because there's not much backtracking needed other than very little things like doing the kite so that you can go kill the snake. There's really not much there. Most of the shortcuts, you open them, you don't really need them afterwards. It's kind of like DS3. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that with regards to Metroidvanian level design.
Yeah, well, that's a somewhat common label that gets slapped onto Miyazaki's games. Almost that the thinking behind them originally was, let's make a fully 3D Metroid or Castlevania game. And I certainly think the Soulsborne games have a debt to Castlevania, no doubt. But in my mind, a hallmark of a true Metroidvania is the backtracking, which is usually made possible through a new ability you didn't have before. And there are moments where there's hints of that in a game like Sekiro. For example, when you wake up in the well, there's an item and a path behind you that you can't access in the tutorial, but later you can return to the reservoir, fight the mini-boss, and go farther than you could before. They even tempt you in Elden Ring Stranded Graveyard, the cave you wake up in at the beginning of the game, where there's that item above and behind you that at first you have no idea how to access. So it makes you go, okay, I must come back here later, or I'm going to access this cave from a different direction later. But I don't think there's enough backtracking. And I think of, the prosthetics in Sekiro as tools for being creative and experimental with combat. It's not like you get the flame vent and then you can burn down some bamboo back at the dilapidated temple and uncover a new pathway that's actually tied to progression, because that would be very Metroidvania. But Sekiro doesn't do much of that. Like, they funnel you back through Ashina outskirts later in the game where the Demon of Hatred is, but it's not like you're back there because you're Samus and have unlocked the ability to roll through a hole in a fence or something. Like, the devs are sending you back through the outskirts for storytelling purposes. That's about them showing you that the Ashina clan's role is coming to an end and that the interior ministry is closing in, and now there's this fiery demon running around whose identity is significant to you. Basically, everything's going to hell, and they're showing you that. And instead of sunny daylight, it's now night, and everything's burning, and snow is slowly falling. So that's just, in my opinion, more FromSoft being master environmental storytellers and less about Metroidvania influence. But it's funny because I've heard people describe games like Hollow Knight or Blasphemous as Souls-likes, and I do disagree there. Well, they certainly owe some kind of debt to the Soulsborne games, minute to minute, mechanically. They're Metroidvanias. So I guess the way I see it is that you can have a Metroidvania game with Soulsborne influence, or you can have a Soulsborne or Souls-like game with Metroidvania influence, if that makes sense.
That's interesting to note with that there isn't a whole lot of backtracking, but they do exist. And whenever they do, I feel like they are so well placed in terms of, usually it's some item that is very hard won. You fought through a ton of shit and you finally get this thing, and they do entice you to maybe go back and check out this one thing that you were curious about before, but you don't have to do it. Most of the time, right. It's not required, and that's another testament to the level design and also their ability to pull the player in by keeping your interest. Like, they do keep you moving, and the backtracking doesn't necessarily feel like, here's really time-consuming and kind of boring backtracking to a degree. Alien Isolation. I'm playing that right now, and it takes forever to just find, like, I go through 4 hours of backtracking and I get like 1 ID tag and 1 email that I missed. So it's, I mean, it's
nothing
satisfying.
like getting an email after some hard work. You know?
I mean, it's satisfying to a degree for a completionist, right? But in these games, they're not pulling at the completionist in the player. They're pulling at your curiosity. And I mean, we're going back to level design now, and it makes me think of, you were saying that everything is so well placed. It goes for the enemies as well. Like, wherever they put an enemy, it's designed for you to learn a new skill, like to hone a new combat, not ability, but a reflex, if that makes sense. Like how the armored knight, the sad dad on the bridge, that he's got so much backstory to him. Oh my god. I think he's the very first boss that really teaches you the importance of deflecting, that you can win by just deflecting and no attacking. It's him first, or you can go the other way. And the first Wolverine that you deal with in the gun fort, she could be one as well. But that's what I'm saying, is like, it's a testament to good level design, especially when this game is so combat centric. Sekiro is the first game where there is consistent background music in every area, not just a couple of special places like in the other games. It came as a surprise for me. I did not expect that. I don't know if that was the same for you when you first started playing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, coming off of the previous game, Sekiro, as sick as it looked from the trailers to the marketing materials, it had me a tad conflicted at first. I mean, it's an action game, not really an RPG. There's no character creator. Activision is the publisher, and now there's background music. So there was part of me thinking, what is this? What is From doing here? But as I always do with their games, I tried to put my own subjectivity aside and approach it more like, hey, this is interactive art. This is someone's vision. And I just surrendered and went on the ride they wanted to take me on. And obviously, years later, that's why we're here having this conversation, because that ride affected us both profoundly and still does. And as of today, I adore the Sekiro soundtrack. And just because there's music throughout, it doesn't mean it's all bombastic. To the contrary, Yuka Kitamura, the legend Yuka Kitamura, she was able to flex so many new muscles in this soundtrack. The quieter pieces she composed, they're so beautiful, they're so evocative, and they do a lot to color the world and specific locations and to reinforce certain themes or tell the story of certain characters. And like we said with rooftop platforming, ambient background music is another ingredient from Sekiro that I think made Elden Ring even better. And if you're craving silence, like with the past games, you just go into the menu and turn off the music. It's simple, and that's actually something I've done many times when first learning bosses, not just in Sekiro, but in past games too, because it can really help you concentrate, I find. But yeah, huge fan of this soundtrack.
Although I personally feel that the area music of Sekiro outshines that of Elden Ring, but I think for a good reason as well. Like, it's just a different kind of game. Elden Ring being so open, area music changes depending on how you're stealthing. It's the music tells you whether or not you are about to face a perilous situation, if you're about to be seen and whatnot. It's interesting how, like, even the music leans towards these mechanics of stealth and combat. And I would say that I was delighted the first time I heard music, just because it's different, and it makes me think about one of your earlier questions about this being a solitary journey. It's funny that, like, in all the other games, it's also a solitary journey. I mean, if you're not playing online with your friends, right, you're still this one person. You're the one. It's your destiny. You gotta put the thing on the thing and do the thing, right? But I think that loneliness in those games is enhanced by there being so little area music. 2, 3 areas that have music for each game. Whereas in Sekiro, I think that's the difference, is that you're not lonely, you're just solitary. And it's just, it lends towards the reminder that you are a fixed protagonist. You are a person that actually has a backstory. You're not a nobody who has nothing, like who's basically just a shell in all the other games. You have a story, you have a childhood that you just don't really remember. I think that's another aspect, I think, is the music feeds towards that journey. Not just, because the music definitely tells the story of all these different areas and the people that live in it. I mean, if you really listen to the music, there's so many layers to it, just like the worlds themselves. But I think just the decision to have area music drives the narrative of you being an actual person.
Yes, for sure. Whereas in a game like Dark Souls 3, the main character is almost more the dying world itself than you, or whatever character you create. Whereas in Sekiro, you're Wolf, you're a shinobi, you're the adopted son of Owl, you're the protector of Kuro, you live in Ashina. And to your point about the Sekiro background music maybe being more effective than the Elden Ring music, it probably goes back to what we were saying about Sekiro just being such a tightly designed and curated game. The Sunken Valley as a level is so defined and finite that the ambient music fits every nook and cranny perfectly, from the people who occupy the valley to its color palette and the fact that it's very breezy and affected by weather. Whereas a location like Limgrave in Elden Ring is so vast and expansive and dynamic that its music likely fits certain portions of the region better than others, Well, and because Ashina is such a smaller world compared to the lands between, the devs have more control over kind of when and how you experience certain things, and then they can even play with your expectations. I go back to your story about spotting that first monk when you got to Senpou, and how you're tempted to think, well, a monk should be a friend in a game like this, but you were able to lock onto the monk, and then you notice how weird his skin appears, and then even the music in this level, the tension it creates, how eerie it is. It doesn't, the music doesn't match the outward beauty of the mountain and its trees and the waterfalls. You'd think such a beautiful place would also feature music that would calm and lull you, but it actually does the opposite. And that's kind of another giveaway. It's another way in which the devs are using different ingredients for storytelling, in this case, music. And that music can tip you off that something is very wrong with the monks living on this mountain, even before you fight them in battle.
Yes.
We kind of already touched on music a bit, but I just kind of want to geek out a little bit more about art direction in general, like the aesthetics and the color palette, just all these ingredients that tie the game together. Yeah, Sekiro is certainly a very easy game on the eyes, a very visually stunning game. I would say the color palette kind of ranges from like deep, dark navy blue all the way to really pale, hazy shades of yellow with lots of like browns and greens in between. What do you think about color in this game?
I mean, I am first and foremost a painter. I've been drawing and painting since I was 3 years old, and I have a deep affinity for visuals and color. And I mean, I don't want to make this about me, but the fact that I have synesthesia. So the fact that there is music in the game and how the color palette of each area, it all ties together with the music, and it's quite an experience for me. It's quite trippy actually because of what I have, the synesthesia. In terms of color in Sekiro, how I respond or how I perceive things is not so much the hues, but it's the warmth and the cold is the most distinct aspect that I am drawn to or that I notice. For example, when the contrast of you going to Sunken Valley, that's cold. And it's not just the ice, it's not just the ice, the snow, whatnot. It's because of how blue and white it is, Go to Senpou, it's all warm. It's all oranges and reds and yellows, the fiery colors.
Yeah.
And that it's not just a difference in the cold, hot temperatures for you to, for the player to relate to, oh, this place is cold, this place has got nicer weather, for lack of a better word. It's also how the warmth and coldness of color defines the area. Like, it gives the player something to expect when they come to a place. Like Mibu has a very cold color to it. Even the yellows from the lanterns and the little fireflies and whatnot, it's a colder yellow. It's not the lovely warm golden colors that you see a lot in Souls, in Elden Ring. When you come to a bonfire, for instance, that's warm. It's not just because it's a bonfire, it's the color scheme. It ignites feeling in the player of safety, like a haven, versus a cold place. Again, at the same time, everywhere in the world of Ashina and all the levels, the music does have a sense of unwelcoming. Like Senpou, definitely, especially when you're fighting the monks, the music does it. It's a warning. The music is telling you, you are not supposed to be here. You are not welcome here. You're an intruder. That's what it feels like. In most places, the color palette and the warmth and coldness of it ties in with the music. But there are a couple of places where that's not the case. Senpou and the Fountainhead are very pleasant, very comforting palettes, and inviting. This looks like a place where you can hang out and, spend a weekend, But then
probably don't want to do that though.
No, but don't do that. No, but
I don't want to get an Airbnb at Senpou Temple anytime soon.
No, I'm not a fan of that. No. There's a little bit of that in the Fountainhead, but not so much. It's still very tranquil with, the flute. Well, it's so annoying when after a while you hear all that flute playing, right? But it's quite lovely. The tranquil, peaceful woodwind instruments and the water, that all evokes a sense of tranquility and ease in the Fountainhead. It's only in little pockets and certain moments of the soundtrack for the Fountainhead that you hear there is something very wrong with this place.
So throughout Sekiro, there's obviously tons of Buddhist and Shinto symbols and references. There's lots of torii gates. There's little Shinto shrines in some of the Mibu village houses. There's ropes tied around trees. Obviously, Buddhist statues are everywhere, almost watching you eerily from above. And of course, rebirth and this bigger concept of cycles around life and death are really foundational to Buddhism. And well, pretty much every Miyazaki game tackles this idea of what it means to die, what it means to be alive, what it means to be human. This feels very much at the forefront of Sekiro. Whereas Dark Souls is fixated on fire thematically, symbolically, not to say fire doesn't have a role in Sekiro too, it does, but Sekiro feels very much about water to me, the power of water, the flowing of water, the waters running down from the Fountainhead becoming less and less pure as they reach the sunken depths in Mibu Village. Another topic is architecture. I think it's particularly amazing in Sekiro because it's not just this, let's say, amalgamation of like cool Gothic or medieval styles. It's very much rooted in time and place. From the little chibi roof ornaments you see at Ashina Castle depicting sea monsters, or like the deepest part of Hirata Estate, it's built in that very classic Shinden style with sprawling symmetrical buildings that surround a bridged pond.
Oh, absolutely. Since you're talking about the research, it's totally era appropriate as well, or era accurate. When if you do the actual research, you know what? Even down to the I don't know if most people pay attention to it. I think you only probably would if you know the language. But even the style of calligraphy, it's accurate to the period. Because calligraphy or handwriting for kanji, it's evolved over, thousands of years. And it all comes together with all the little things that tie into the architecture as well. It makes me think of all, since you mentioned the little shrines and the bits of rope that are tied everywhere, and there's also these little pots of incense. Do you notice them? There's all these monuments. You don't it's not just in Ashina or Mibu, or you don't see that a whole lot in the Fountainhead, and for good reason, because of what that place is. Even in the Sunken Valley you see that. You know that it is at first a broken bridge where you fight the second general. I call him Broken Bridge Ned. And it's your way to get to the snake, your first encounter with the snake. If you're right there, it doesn't matter if you're at the start of the game or if you're at the end of the game with no one there, like if you killed everyone at the bridge when it's been built. But if you go there and you turn off the music and turn up the sound effects, you can hear ghosts wailing in the abyss.
Whoa, I actually didn't know that.
It is so freaky. It happens in a cycle. You gotta wait for it. I just thought of that since we were talking about music and sound effects and the world design and all that. I wondered if you might like to put that in your video. I've known people who platted a whole pile of FromSoft games and don't really even know what the story's about. And that's fine. But I do hear this from practically everyone, is that even when they don't care about the story, or they know very little about it, or just on the surface, they understand, basically what's going on from point A to point B, everyone says that Sekiro is a very pretty world to be in. It's very enjoyable to just take it all in, really. Like, even people who don't like the game, I've heard, can appreciate its beauty.
Right.
And the level of detail and passion that went into it. You just can't deny it. It's basically, I guess beauty is subjective, but some things are just undeniable. Like you cannot deny that a lot of attention and research had gone into every aspect of, like, every corner of every region of that world. It is really quite something. And when you're speaking of the architecture, they it's like the music. They tell you about the people. Like, look at the gun fort. Look at what they built. And then look at just further down. If you go further down, you see these, they're basically statues built into the mountainside, surrounding where the guardian ape is at, right? It lends to the mythological aspect of the world, sure. But like, it does make you wonder, when you look at these things, these the castle, Ashina Castle, or Senpou Temple, or these very primitive shacks that they're also surrounded by these statues, like at the poison pool. It does make you wonder, like, who were these people who built all this? What was their story? And so many of Miyazaki's stories are all about cycles, and it does when you sit down and really think about it, it's quite intriguing to wonder at how other cycles could have been, like what other experiences there were before all of this.
Oh yeah, I love talk of cycles. We know Miyazaki is obsessed with them. They're central to all of his games. They're of course very front and center in Dark Souls, but even Bloodborne, depending on the ending you choose, you essentially become Gehrman, and presumably all of this will play out again, and you will one day greet a new hunter who stumbles into the dream. But I think it's so interesting FromSoft chose the Sengoku period for Sekiro. This era has been very popular in media and fiction and movies, and there's lots of other video games set in some version of this time and place, but it makes so much sense here because this was a period of unending war with all these clans vying for power, gobbling up whatever land they could, and we're just seeing a glimpse in time. And it's not the glory days of the Ashina clan. We're seeing the end. Isshin, sick and frail in his tower. Genichiro, even as much as he comes off like the villain of the story in typical FromSoft fashion, they always operate in shades of gray. And depending on your perspective, you can actually sympathize with Genichiro and pity him more than dislike him or something. And like you said, if you descend into the depths of this land, there's all these probably once ornate but now aging statues among these nomadic folk who are wearing rags and living in makeshift huts. And it does get you thinking, like you said, what happened here? Who created these? Why don't we see any of them up high near the castle? Like it's all become lost and forgotten, literally sinking into a poisonous pool at the bottom, where apes are guarding a divine lotus flower that grows out of the resting place of the fountainhead waters. It's just incredible to think about. But as much as Sekiro, I think, will be remembered for its combat system, and should be, if you just dropped that action, that gameplay onto a blank canvas, it wouldn't stick like it does. It wouldn't be so unforgettable, drawing you back playthrough after playthrough, year after year. Like you said earlier, Sekiro, along with all the Miyazaki games really, but Sekiro definitely is this interwoven web of gameplay and music and color and physical space, and all of those strands of the web, so to speak, come together to create a game that I can't resist even after 5 years, that no matter whatever else I'm playing or whatever else comes out in the future, Sekiro is one of those special games. It's so thoughtfully designed that I'll always have in the back of my mind. And I certainly think I speak for both of us there.
Yeah, I'm so looking forward to this video to see what sort of footage you captured. There's no shortage of beauty to enjoy in this game. I'm excited to see what caught your eye in the monocular.
Oh, for sure. And thank you for hanging and sharing so many insightful tidbits from years of playing this game. This was so much fun, and I can't imagine a better way to celebrate Sekiro's anniversary.
Thank you for the opportunity. I could never pass up the opportunity to nerd out about, a shared passion. It's just wonderful.
Whether it was a dream or it was reality, I have no idea. There is one thing I can tell you. The great Buddha has seen fit to awaken old memories within you. What you felt, what you remembered, that is what it all depends upon. That's how it works. I won't say any more, and neither should you. All that you saw was yours alone.